This is the first video in a series of videos on Jesus cleansing the temple in the Gospels and how that relates to gospel reliability. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus goes into the temple during Passion Week, and he overturns tables, and he drives people out, and he rebukes the merchants and the money changers. In John's Gospel, Jesus does something quite similar, but John makes it quite clear that he's describing an event that was very early in Jesus' ministry. So the question arises, well, what happened? Did he do it twice? A number of scholars, including several evangelical scholars, have strongly suggested that he did not do it twice, but that John moved the temple cleansing from late in Jesus' ministry to early in Jesus' ministry. This would be what I called in the previous video dyschronological narration. The idea would be that John, as Jesus' apostle, knew when Jesus did do this very important event that was such a prominent feature of the last week of his life, but that he deliberately changed it in his own version of the story and made it happen early in Jesus' ministry instead. Dr. Craig Keener is very definite that this is what John did. Dr. William Lane Craig has definitely stated this, and Dr. Michael Licona has endorsed that this is a very reasonable idea, even though he hasn't committed to it as fully. What are the arguments that John made this change of facts? One of the arguments, which is the one I'm going to deal with today, is the idea that it would be artificial or strained to take there to be two temple cleansings. Dr. Bill Craig has been very definite on this. He has said quite definitely this was the same event and that he used to believe that they were two, but now he believes that it's not necessary to resort to such an artificial harmonization. The idea here is that the events are just too similar, that they're in fact uncannily similar. And if you get descriptions that are uncannily similar in their little nitpicky details, then it becomes artificial to say that this exact thing in all this detail really happened twice. Well, is that really true? Are there really such uncanny similarities between the two temple cleansing accounts that it would be one of those bad harmonizations, one of those artificial, strained harmonizations, to say that he did it twice, that Jesus did something similar twice? No. In fact, it would not. In fact, in his book on the reliability of John's Gospel, Dr. Craig Blomberg has said, the words the two accounts have in common are those one would expect in a description of an incident involving the protest of corruption in the Jerusalem temple, even if two different events are in view: sellers, tables, doves, money changers, drove out temple and house. Otherwise, one is struck by the differences. And then he goes on to list several of those differences. In a different book on the historical reliability of the Gospels, Dr. Blomberg has said that it's really the bare minimum of content required to narrate a temple cleansing that is similar between the two. Not only does Dr. Blomberg list these differences, Alan Chappell, another New Testament scholar, in an article on the temple cleansing, where he endorses two in the Journal of the Evangelical Theological Society, has also listed quite a number of these differences, and I've done so as well in my book, The Mirror or the Mask. Here's just a representative sample of the differences of narrative between the two accounts. Only John mentions the oxen and the whip, that Jesus used a whip and that he drove out oxen. John says that the rulers confronted Jesus apparently right away, and that they asked him to show a sign by what authority he did this. There's no mention of a request for a sign in the Synoptic Gospels, and in fact, Mark says that they asked him what authority he had to do these things the next day, but doesn't mention that they asked for a sign. Matthew narrates they're challenging the fact that the children are singing Hosanna in the temple precincts. But the dialogue with the Jewish leaders is by no means uncannily similar. In fact, only in John does Jesus say for the sign, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up, which is a cryptic saying that we'll come back to in a later video. Only Mark says that Jesus forbade carrying things in the temple. In John, Jesus' words of rebuke are, take these things away. Stop making my Father's house a house of merchandise. In the Synoptics, Jesus says, it is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer. And then he says, but you have made it a den of thieves, an even stronger rebuke. And there are many more of these differences. Now, I want to emphasize, if we had strong independent reason to believe that these were the same events, for example, if all the Gospels said that this occurred during Passion Week, we could put these differences together by what is known as additive harmonization and say that all of these different details happened. They wouldn't necessarily even in that case amount to a contradiction. But there's no need to do that when we have strong independent reason to believe that they are in fact different occurrences, that one occurred at the beginning and one occurred at the end of Jesus' ministry. In that case, the question we're asking is, are they so uncannily similar that it would be strained to think of them as two different events? And these differences then show that the answer to that is no, by no means are they uncannily similar. They're just generally described similar events. Now, we can see illustrations of this in our own world. Just in the last few months, we've had many protests all over this country that could be described in very similar terms generally. But that doesn't mean that there was only one of them. Or to use a different example of an actually peaceful protest instead of only a mostly peaceful protest, I've stood out in front of the same Planned Parenthood clinic on more than one occasion, even holding a sign that said the same thing if I was representing 40 Days for Life, a pro-life organization, and it's the same Planned Parenthood. So you could have those several words that would be the same, like what Blomberg lists, generally similar descriptions, but that doesn't mean that the very same person came up to me and we had the very same conversation and she was wearing the very same clothes. If I gave two accounts and I described little details that were similar in that way, then you might think I was talking about the same event. But that's not the kind of thing that we find in the case of the temple cleansing. Scholars have other objections, and in particular, one other kind of objection to the idea of there being two temple cleansings, and we'll talk about that in the next video. It's based on what I call a priori history. But I believe that what's influencing a lot of people to think that the two accounts cannot describe two events is this notion in the back of their minds that they're just so similar. And if they're so similar, then we should take them to be the same event, because otherwise we're just desperate harmonizers scrambling to try to say that something uncannily similar happened on multiple occasions. So this video is explaining that that is in fact not the case and clearing that objection out of the way. Come back next time when I'll be talking about the temple cleansing and a priori history. I'm Lydia McGrew. Thanks for watching.